Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Week 2 of practice is underway. We are just 2 weeks away from the opener in South Bend. On today's show, my guest is beat writer Aaron McMann from Mlive, as we continue to preview, speculate, and yes, even guess just what we're going to see when we tee it up for real down in South Bend. Before Aaron joins us on the game day segment, a few news and notes to get us started. On Monday night, Jim Harbaugh met with the media for the first time since practice began. We didn't expect much, and that's what we got. Jim said the quarterback battle is fierce, no starter named yet. He's very happy with the offensive line, the defense, and in general, the whole team and the way they are preparing. In the 3 years Jim has been here, he has never given out much information before the season, which I suppose frustrates fans and some of the media, but I do agree with him. It's not as if he's hiding anything. There's just so much work to be done, and that's what's going on. Competition, decisions, bonding, making yourself ready for a long season. There just isn't much to talk about right now, and I think that's how Jim feels too. In one sense, I think he's in the same boat as we are right now. He just doesn't know what to expect from his team, but he's going to have a better idea after the Notre Dame game, and then we'll have something to talk about. Up next on my game day segment is beat writer Aaron McMann from Mlive, here on the Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Back with us on our game day segment this week as we continue our previews of the fast approaching upcoming season is Michigan beat writer Aaron McMann from Mlive. Great to have you back with us, Aaron.
Good to be back, Mike.
Well, we know it's week 2 of camp underway as of today. We're recording on Monday morning, Aaron. Jim's going to talk, I think he's scheduled to talk to the media this week, isn't he?
He is, yep. He is early this week, Monday night.
Well, that's tonight, of course, so we're going to be getting some kind of an update. I'm sure the number one question on everyone's mind is going to be, do we have a starter at quarterback yet? Would you be surprised if he gives us an answer?
You know, we were talking about that last week as writers. You know, I could see it going either way here. You know, Jim's obviously been pretty close to the vest when it comes to the quarterback situation. You know, obviously last year it came down to, you know, the final week. In fact, the day before the game, I think, is when Wilton Spade finally found out he was going to be the starting quarterback. I could see it playing out again like that this year, but the same token, too, I think, you know, most of us around the program, you know, have this idea in their head already that, you know, Shea Patterson is the guy. You know, there's a reason they brought him on. You know, he participated in all 15 spring practices. He's by far his most experienced in terms of starting games and playing in, you know, big-time atmospheres of, you know, on the roster. So I could see this going either way. You know, I could see him waiting again until the final day or final week, just to give I guess Michigan some leverage going into the season opener at Notre Dame. But the same token too, I could see Harbaugh kind of, you know, letting this all go and naming Shea Patterson the guy, and kind of letting him ride out fall camp. You know, as the guy. You know, he's still got learning to do. He's still learning the playbook. He's still getting acclimated with his teammates and the coaching staff and the offense and everything else. But at some point, I think you've got to name a guy and you've got to ride with him.
I agree with that. Last week on BTN, Coach Jerry DiNardo, was saying, ideally as a coach, he was being asked this question, when do you want your starting quarterback named? And he said, you know, if it's a battle, you would prefer it the first 10 to 14 days of practice that you have a starter for a lot of reasons. And he went on to list those reasons. But he said when talking about Michigan, you know, he said it might be that Jim Harbaugh tells the team and they know behind the closed doors, but he's not going to be making it public. But he thinks even we have to make that decision after the first 14 days. Do you agree?
Yeah, you know, and that's something we heard from even, you know, Pep Hamilton, the assistant head coach and passing game coordinator, you know, last season and then again in spring. You know, Pep had, he said, and keep in mind when he said this in the spring that Shea hadn't been ruled eligible yet to play by the NCAA, but he preferred knowing guys sooner rather than later. They want to know at least internally. And you're right, it could be a case where they tell the starting quarterback this week or next that you're the guy, and Jim Harbaugh may decide. And may not decide to name him until the day of the game or the day before the game. So yeah, it's very well possible that they kind of know behind closed doors and they just don't want it to get out. They've done a pretty good job so far, since camp started, of not really publicizing anything. I can remember last year, especially early in camp, at least on Michigan social media channels and Facebook and Twitter, they would publish short video clips or photos from camps. We're not getting any of that now. There's nothing. So they've been pretty like you mentioned, top secret, I guess, since the beginning. They haven't said much. Been a lot of rehash, and I'm curious to see what Coach Harbaugh has to say this week.
Yeah, that will be interesting. And as you've just said, you beat writers know not much leaks from behind the walls of Fort Schembechler. Last week we did hear there was some fierce competition battles underway. One of the positions mentioned was weak side linebacker. Who do you hear is in the mix there, Aaron, for more playing time?
Yeah, they've got really 2 and 3 guys there. The nice thing about the linebacking core, and Don Brown mentioned this when we spoke to him last week, is just how deep it is. You've got, Devin Gill seems to be the leader right now at weak side linebacker. He has more experience of the most experience of the 3 going back to last season. He started. Folks may not remember this, but he actually started the season opener last fall against Florida. So he's got experience. He played in all 13 games. He seemed to be the leader coming out of spring. It sounds like he's still the leader right now. Josh Ross is a guy who's competing for that spot. And interestingly enough, Don Brown made it mention that last week as well that Josh Ross is also kind of cross-training at middle linebacker behind Devin Bush Jr. And that's kind of what Devin Bush started when he came to Michigan. He started at weak side. They eventually moved him to middle. So I'm curious to see what they end up doing with Josh Ross. And then Drew Singleton's another name that's kind of come up. Didn't play much last year. He's a young, talented guy that I know they like. But right now, it sounds like it's Devin Gill's job to lose. He was the name that came up pretty consistently during the spring. And it sounds like he's still the guy right now.
Well, some other players we're hearing good things about, Aaron, starting with Brad Hawkins at strong safety. From what the staff says, he has had not only an impressive spring, but an impressive summer and start to fall camp.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy because, since he came in, he's kind of moved around quite a bit. He was a defensive back in high school. He also played receiver. He came in as a safety. They decided to move him to the Viper last year to at least give him a look. They put him behind Khalil Hudson. He got a little bit of playing time, especially on special teams, and they kind of messed around with him a little bit there. And then they decided, I guess, this spring to move him back to safety. Sounds like it was Don Brown's call. They like his speed and his tackling ability there. So far he's impressed. It sounds like Brown was raving about him last week. I think he called him I guess the biggest jump in the secondary of all the secondary guys from last season to fall camp. So they like what he's doing right now. Whether he gets in the game and plays much as safety remains to be seen. That position's kind of been interesting because you got 2 obviously returning starters there, and you got a lot of competition in the secondary. I don't see much changing a cornerback. When it comes to safety, you've got Hawkins there, you've got Gio and Kelly Powell. You've got the cornerback transfer from Utah, Casey Hughes, coming in. He started at cornerback, but it sounds like he's starting in the safety room there. He started 11 games last year, so he's clearly got an edge and experience there. But with Hawkins and Kelly Powell and Hughes, and they're pretty deep in the secondary. So I'm curious to see where things kind of settle here at the beginning of the season. Another
kid Don Brown just seems to gush about his linebacker, and help me with the pronunciation of the last name. Is it Josh Uche?
Yes, Uche is it.
You hear him talking about Josh. I think in his words, he said he is playing like an animal. Jim referred to him recently as playing like a beast. It just sounds like he's ready to maybe have a bust-out year, Aaron.
Yeah, and he's another guy who, he had good potential last year. Didn't get. He played some, but it was mainly on special teams. He saw some backup reps at linebacker. But it sounds like he's put on some weight, gained some strength. And Don Brown actually told us the funny story last week. After the Outback Bowl, I guess Josh went to Don Brown complaining of not playing enough. Apparently, he wanted to play more. And Brown basically told him, like, if you want to play more, you got to earn it. It sounds like from spring into fall camp, Don Brown has said he's earned it. Like you say, he's bulked up. He's improved his knowledge of the playbook. They liked his pass rushing ability. That hasn't really been a problem. But it was more of coverages and reading defenses that he was still kind of getting used to. Sounds like he's improved there. And I'm curious to see where he figures out, because obviously we just talked about the linebacker situation kind of being figured out. But they like him in a kind of a hybrid linebacker defensive end role. So it's going to be interesting to see where he fits in terms of different defensive schemes. Obviously, he won't be an every down linebacker, but he might fit in here and there in a different defensive scheme against a different offense. But it sounds like he's going to be playing more. Jim raved about him at Big Ten Media Days. Don Brown raved about him some more last week. He's a guy to definitely keep an eye on.
Well, it seems like the first freshman getting mentioned out of camp is Michael Barrett, who's working out at the Viper spot on defense. It sounds like he might get to contribute early too, Aaron.
Yeah, I say of the freshmen, the incoming class, he seems to be a guy that may stand out right away. He's a guy who played both sides of the ball in high school. He played quarterback. He played defensive back. He can run. He's got good athleticism. So they like him in different places. When they brought him in, they identified him as an athlete. Basically keeping the door open to playing him anywhere. Obviously they're loaded at quarterback, so that doesn't necessarily work. The secondary and defense, and we just talked about this, but the secondary is pretty much stacked right now. But they like him in that they're kind of grooming him for that Viper role behind Khalid Hudson. Like I mentioned earlier, they moved Brad Hawkins to safety, so they got some time there. Khalid Hudson may go to the NFL next year. Will remain to be seen. But they've got a full year now to kind of groom him. They like his athleticism and his speed. So we'll see where he fits in. When true freshmen, it's always interesting because it's going to depend on how quickly they adapt to the offense, how quickly they pick things up, and they can play at the college speed. People kind of forget about that sometimes. You go from playing high school to college, and sometimes the game speeds up on you. Some guys react quicker and acclimate quicker, and some take some time. So I think you're going to see him take some time this year in that role. I wouldn't expect a ton of him playing a ton at Viper, at least in games. But he'd be a good candidate to start on special teams. I think he'll end up there at least early on.
Well, again, as we've discussed, there isn't much that really leaks from behind the walls of Fort Schembechler. But are there any other names you've heard about, Aaron, that are making an early impression in camp?
Yeah, Jalen Mayfield's a guy on the offensive line. We've talked about the struggles of the offensive line, the question marks at the tackle spots. His name is coming up a little bit at right tackle. He's obviously another true freshman. Going back to Big Ten Media Days in the last few weeks, it sounds like Jim Harbaugh and the coaching staff have identified potential starters at right and left tackle. They've mentioned John Runyon Jr.'s name at right tackle. They've mentioned Juwan Bushell-Beatty's name at left tackle. But there are several guys that sound like competing behind them. So it sounds like it hasn't been decided just yet. Left tackle, we're hearing a lot about James Hudson, the redshirt freshman from Toledo, Ohio, and then Mayfield, the true freshman from the West Michigan Grand Rapids area. He's got good size. I think he's north of 300 right now. He's got good strength. They may give him a look. I don't know, but it sounds like I mentioned, it sounds like Bushell-Beatty's the guy at right, or excuse me, Runyon's the guy at right tackle. But it also sounds like he's pushing a little bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if you hear John Runyon's name here in the next few weeks. Don't be shocked. It sounds like he's impressive.
Well, I don't know why, but from the listeners I hear from, one of the most asked questions is, will we have an offensive coordinator this year? And I think our fans ask that question because it seems as if everyone else does, Aaron, but it sounds like Jim is just very happy with the collaboration method he's using now, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the term he's been using nonstop going back to spring. I've asked him a couple times now about the offensive coordinator situation. And others have asked about it as well. It sounds like they're happy with what they've got at least right now. They've got, obviously Jim's involved. They've got Pep Hamilton involved just like he was last year. It sounds like Ed Warner has some involvement. You got Jim McElwain, who has plenty of head coaching and coordinating experience with wide receivers. But then again, it calls into that question. This is something that came up last year with the struggles on offense. Are there too many chefs in the kitchen?
Mm-hmm.
Are there too many people dialing up plays or giving inputs? Because at the end of the day, obviously you want input from different sides and you want people speaking up if things aren't going well. But I think there needs to be that one or two that solid, that vision from someone or something. Last year, we obviously the play calling duties were split between Pep Hamilton and Tim Grevno, with Harbaugh chiming in if he, didn't like something or wanted something else. But we haven't really gotten much clarity on who's going to be calling the plays again this year. I would be shocked if Pep Hamilton wasn't involved again. But then again, where does that leave Warner and McElwain? I remember talking to McElwain when he first got hired, back in the spring, and he made it sound like he was kind of he was coming in to play second fiddle. He said he called this Pep Hamilton's offense. He was kind of learning from Pep in terms of the types of things they do at Michigan and the way they run things. Whether that's changed remains to be seen. But Jim keeps talking about collaboration. He likes the different voices in the room. He likes the different voices with the offense. So we'll see. I suspect we'll get more clarity here in the next few weeks. But knowing Harbaugh and the way he hold things back, maybe not.
Hopefully we'll get some clarity. But I think what I think Jim really means, collaboration, meaning game planning. You have McElwain, you have Warner, you have Pep, you have Jim. As far as working during the week to set the game plan, because you don't have time during the game to collaborate with all those people. You have to have one or two people making the calls.
Absolutely. And, the coaches will sit down during the week and they'll script the first, 15, 20 plays out of the game just to see how things go. And you saw it work better at times than others last year. I can specifically remember the start of the Ohio State game I thought was very well done. They looked very good offensively in sync. And there were times last year where it didn't look in sync at all. In fact, most seasons it did. So you're very right. I would suspect that all those guys will be involved in the game planning and the the scripting and everything else early on, and then after that is, I think, the question of where do they go from there? Who takes the lead? Who takes the the ball and kind of runs with it? We'll see here.
With us on our Game Day segment this week as we continue our previews in advance of the upcoming season in the opener in South Bend is beat writer Aaron McMann from Mlive. Aaron, in one of your stories last week, you mentioned that Don Brown is doing more tweaking than teaching with the defense this year. I thought that was a good terminology. And he did meet with the media last week, as you mentioned. He seemed just very relaxed. You get the vibe from him that he thinks his defense could be even better than last year. And I think a lot of people agree with that assessment, don't they?
Oh, yeah. He in spring, he called this the fastest defense I think he's ever had. And combine that with the depth. And he talked about this last week, but they've got, a ton of depth in the defensive line. If one of those guys happens to get injured, they could plug a guy in and probably be fine. So between that and you've got a ton of guys at linebacker, secondary largely set. You've got, like I mentioned earlier, Casey Hughes and some other guys who you can plug in the secondary and be fine with as well. There isn't a ton of learning going on. It's more, how do we get better? How do we improve? How do we, fix the little, maybe the cracks in the defense that were, showed last year. I know they keep mentioning they're tweaking things with the defensive scheme that can help the secondary, because I know there were a couple times last year where those long balls and those deep passes kind of, it hurt the Michigan defense. But yeah, it's largely a, how do we get better? How do we improve, as opposed to, how are we learning this? How are we teaching this? Don even mentioned back in 2016. I remember how good this was. The 10-win Michigan team. They had a ton of NFL guys on there. He came in and he's still doing a lot of teaching. Then he thinks this defense is better than that year. He thinks his defense is better than last season. And I'm curious to see how much better they can get. They were third overall in the country last year. They had no one passed defense in the country last year. How do you build on that? And I'm curious to see how it shakes out.
Well, if the offense makes improvements, the defense does not have to be a shutdown unit. It can be as good, and if it's better than last year, that's great too. But at quarterback, we sort of think we're going to see Shea Patterson. But the offensive line is the key on that side of the ball, I think. From everything we hear, Aaron, Coach Warner has made a big difference with the big uglies, hasn't he?
He has. We've heard a lot about simplification of kind of the calls at the line of scrimmage, less thinking going on. And that was something under Tim Drevno, and Greg Fry. I guess there was a lot of standing around trying to figure out what was going on. And you could that could be because they were very, very young at the spot. They had a lot of young guys playing last year, a lot of guys rotating in and out. A lot of guys playing positions for the first time. You can look at Cesar Ruiz, perfect example, playing out of position at right guard. So there's a lot of stuff going on last year. I think they realized that they needed to, maybe simplify things and kind of, put things, just make things easier for everyone. One of the things Ed Warner came in when he first came into Michigan, when he got hired back in the late winter, early spring, is, he kind of looked at tape. look at all the players in the line and kind of set spots. You know, he said, you're playing here, you're playing here, you're playing here, and then we're going to go with this simplified, almost, I wouldn't say dumbed down, but just a more simple offensive of philosophy. So they made things easier for the guys. It sounds like things have improved. At least we've been told that. We haven't seen any of it, obviously, but we spoke with Ben Bredesen last week. He's kind of become the captain of the offensive line. He spent the summer with the guys. They were kind of going over, drills with one another and learning each other's tendencies and everything else. It sounds like the interior is largely set. Ben Bredesen obviously is going to get to start left guard. Cesar Reeves has moved back to center. I think he can be really good here with another year or two of experience. Right guard spot, it sounds like there's a little bit of competition there. Michael Onwenu obviously was the guy we thought would start, and I think he's still the leader, but Steven Spinellis is pushing there as well. And then, like I mentioned earlier, you got the tackle spots. Those are, I think, the biggest mysteries at this point. Mm-hmm. Maybe not necessarily in terms of who's going to play there, but in terms of whether they can show improvements. Michigan's, pass defense was not very. I'm sorry, their pass protection was not very good last year. And those tackle spots were one of the reasons. Maybe not so much Mason Cole, who's playing out of position, but that right side was rough. They can solidify that, I think, and become not even a good offensive line, but maybe a middle of the row Big Ten offensive line. I think that will do wonders for this offense.
Well, the next few weeks are tough because everyone that covers the team and the fans will be speculating, playing what if this, what if that happens. One thing is certain, it's year 4 for Jim, and his record against rivals has not been good, and we all know, even Jim says this, it has to change. So if we could, Aaron, let's take a look at those rivalry matchups and get your thoughts on which team has the edge in the key areas, starting with Notre Dame, who, of course, we will see on Labor Day weekend. The Michigan offense versus Notre Dame's defense. The Notre Dame D, one of the best units we will probably see this year, Aaron.
It is. I suspect that game will be a low-scoring one, and I've said this to other folks before, but both these, like you mentioned, both these teams have a good defense. Knowing what we don't know about this Michigan offense, you got to give the edge, I think, right now to Notre Dame. I suspect the receiver group will make a jump. It sounds like they can get better quarterback play. We don't know with the offensive line, but right now you got to give the edge to the Notre Dame defense there.
Well, the Notre Dame offense versus Michigan's defense. The Irish have a lot of questions. The offensive line, Notre Dame's offensive line was considered the best in college football last year. They're replacing a lot of people there, so you would expect they're going to have their hands full with our defense.
Oh, absolutely. I think Michigan's defensive line, more times than not this year is going to win at the line of scrimmage. I mean, we've talked about the depth there. They've got two strong defensive ends. I don't think they have much problem replacing Maurice Hurst. I think you give the edge to the Michigan defensive line there.
Well, it's the opener, and you talk about intangibles. It's Notre Dame. That's all you have to say. It's under the lights. It's a green out, for goodness sake. I don't know that they've ever done a green out in South Bend before, but this sure sets up as a toss-up game, doesn't it?
It does. It's one of those games I think can go either way, and I think in a way it could kind of set the tone for the season for Michigan. If they come out and play well and look good, I think that bodes well for the future. If they come out and don't look good, especially on the offensive side of the ball, then people are going to start questioning, whether this offense has taken a jump. But no, I think a win would do wonders for things. And it's almost in a way a similar game the way at least the season started last year with Florida. Everyone thought that would be a big tone setter, and it kind of was. They won the game, they started the season 4-0 and everything else. But you also got a glimpse of some of the struggles that Michigan had, especially with the quarterback play, the offensive line, everything else. So it's one of those things where we're going to learn a lot early on. Don't get me wrong, there'll be plenty of time for improvement and everything else. But for how little we've seen of this offense, I think it's going to tell us quite a bit that Notre Dame game.
The next rivalry game that is a thorn in everyone's side, every Michigan fan's side for the last decade, is Michigan State. That Spartan defense versus the Michigan offense. Again, I know it's August and it's very difficult to tell. Who would you say has the edge there?
Yeah, Michigan State's got a lot of their guys back. They played well. They always seem to play well against Michigan. Whether Michigan State's defense is a top-ranked unit or not, they come out and you talk about tangibles. And Michigan State seems to have an edge every time they play Michigan, at least recently. So I think you give the edge to Michigan State, at least right now. And again, I'm going off what I don't know about the Michigan offense, and the fact that it's being played in East Lansing and everything else. Got to give the edge to Michigan State.
The Spartan offense just improved in leaps and bounds last year, especially with Lewerke, a quarterback. He is a good-looking quarterback. So my thinking, that is where this game turns, Aaron.
I agree. I think obviously Michigan's defense is strong, and I think it'll hold its own. But how well can they play against this Michigan State offense? I'm like you. I'm impressed with Brian Lewerke. I've got a chance to kind of talk to him one-on-one at Big Ten Media Days last month, and I was impressed with the young man. He speaks well. He's a quietly confident young man. He looked very good last year. I think he has a bright future. But again, Michigan State also returns L.J. Scott, one of their top running backs. They got guys back on the offensive line. They're going to be a tough team to handle, and it being in East Lansing at Michigan State, that kind of gives them a little bit of an edge there. So I'm going to say maybe it's a toss up. It can go either way. I think if Michigan's defense can stop Lewerke and keep him in check, I think that's good. But if he has another big game, then Michigan's going to, I think, struggle.
Well, you talk about the intangibles in that game. It's on the road. I'm sure it's going to be a night game, so you're going to have a jacked up crowd, as if it's if that's whether it's noon, 3:30, or at night. That's what you're going to get in East Lansing. If you had to guess right now, who would you pick in that game?
I'm going to give the edge of Michigan State. I just completed my AP poll, and I think I had them above Michigan State slightly. I had Michigan State slightly above Michigan. But, again, I think we know a lot more about this Michigan State team than we do this Michigan team, at least on both sides of the ball. And I think that's where you got to give the edge, at least right now. Things could change, a month into the season or whatnot. But right now, in knowing that Michigan State's played Michigan so well in the last few years, they beat them 2 of the last 3 games, I'm going to give the edge to Michigan State.
Well, I'm going to throw Penn State in as one of our 4 chief rivals right now, Aaron. To me, they are. The Michigan offense versus that Penn State defense, which returns just 3 starters, Penn State that is, who has the edge there, Aaron? I
was just going to say, this Penn State defense isn't what it was last year. Michigan struggled off mightily on offense last year. I can remember them. They looked good at portions of the second half, and then the quarterback play just killed them. I think Michigan's offense stands to do well against this Penn State defense. I'll give them the edge. I'll give Michigan the edge just for the benefit of the doubt. But again, I'm working with limited information in terms of improvement along the offensive line and quarterback play. So right now, I'll give the edge to the Michigan offense.
Well, Penn State offense versus the Michigan defense. McSorley is back, but there are a lot of new pieces. He lost a lot of his receiving core. Most, I believe, of that offensive line is back, and they have a new offensive coordinator. So that's awfully tough coming into the big house and putting that offense up against the Michigan defense, isn't it?
It is, and keep in mind, Saquon Barkley's gone. He was the one that kind of lit that Michigan defense up last year. As good as it was, they could not stop Saquon. Whether it was running in the pass, he had the edge basically solely on the Michigan defense last year. He's gone, so I think that's good for Michigan, and I think that will give them the edge, especially being a home game at Michigan Stadium.
Well, and we, again, talking about the intangibles, Michigan coming off a bye week before that game. We've won 7 of the last 8 in the big house against Penn State. Will we make it 8 of 9, Aaron?
I would think so. And this is another candidate for a potential night game. They've come up. There've been rumors floating around about a couple games, and that seems to be one of them. But knowing what we know about this Michigan team, with Notre Dame not returning everyone on defense, Saquon Barkley obviously gone. This is a game I think Michigan should have and probably will win.
Well, last but not least of our chief 4 rivals right now, Ohio State. And by the time these 2 teams meet, a lot of questions will be answered, especially the big one right now, who's coaching Ohio State. But as of right now, Aaron, as we stand here in mid-August, the Michigan offense versus that Ohio State defense, who has the edge there in your mind?
Probably the Ohio State defense. This is top to bottom. I think this Buckeyes team is still very good. I think I have them in my top 5. I think they're still the best team in the Big Ten. This game is going to be in Columbus, Ohio. A lot of questions right now, obviously, with the Michigan offense. I think by now, by then, obviously, we'll have things hashed out in terms of, whether or not Shea Patterson ended up being the guy, whether the offense had improved, and whether the offensive line can still hold itself up. Last year, in fact, I just got done writing about this, but a lot of the offensive linemen are bulked up. They're bigger and stronger now. And that was a problem at the end of last season. They had trouble moving guys. They had trouble protecting. And by the time they got around to the Ohio State game, and I think you saw it, but Michigan played so well in the first half, even well in the third quarter, and then the gas kind of ran out of the tank. So I think Michigan stands, a better chance. But again, with not knowing the Ohio State coaching situation, but the fact that they have so many guys back, the game is in Columbus. Ohio State has dominated this series in the last 15 years. I'm going to give that edge to the Buckeyes.
Well, the Ohio State offense versus the Michigan defense. J.T. Barrett's gone. There are still so many moving pieces back in that offense, though. How do you think Don Brown's D stacks up against the Buckeyes?
There are, and I think that's where, right now at least, I want to give the edge to the Michigan defense, because you don't know about the Ohio State offense so much yet. I'm sure they'll have things figured out by then. Urban Meyer's teams usually do. They've got a lot of talent there, don't get me wrong. But I think this is where I think Michigan stands a chance. If they can keep themselves in the game, limit the Buckeyes and kind of moving down the field and scoring, then I think they put themselves in a position. Whether or not it's like last year where they remain pretty much within a touchdown or even up, for part of the game, through the entire game remains to be seen. But no, this is where I think Michigan can kind of close the gap and keep it close there in Columbus.
Well, as far as intangibles in that game, Aaron, there are too many to mention. But for Michigan, I think the tide has to turn sooner or later. I saw the question is going to be, will it be this year in Columbus, Ohio?
Yeah, and I think that's where this Urban Meyer unknown kind of comes in. If he ends up coaching, then I think all is fine. And, Ohio State turns out to be, a top 5 team like many of us think they're going to be. But if something else happens, whether he doesn't coach this year or misses part of the season or whatever, then I think, I think it can change everything. And I've talked about this before, but, if, say, he doesn't return to Ohio State, then there's a ripple effect, I think, on the team, the staff, the recruiting aspect. I think it changes the dichotomy of the rivalry with Michigan. A lot of things would happen. So it's, we're just so far away, and there's so much unknown on both sides with so many of these factors. It's tough to say. But right now, knowing what we do know, and the fact that Ohio State has dominated, you gotta give it to the Buckeyes.
Well, the schedule is brutal. We all agree. But the bottom line is, this is the 4th year of the Jim Harbaugh era, and as Charles Woodson said, it's time to win. Is this the make it or break it year for the Jim Harbaugh program?
That's a good question. I think, yes and no. If they come out again and struggle offensively, struggle with the offensive line, and put up another 8-4 regular season, I think you're going to see some folks kind of questioning what's happening. I think Jim Harbaugh may question himself internally on whether this thing's going to work or not. But whether that forces Michigan to do anything, I don't see that happening. Folks have asked me a lot the last 6 months or so whether Jim Harbaugh is on the hot seat, and I always respond with the same thing. And I said, no, Jim Harbaugh will never be on the hot seat in Michigan. They like him a lot. The program has never been better. Ticket sales are high. TV ratings are through the roof. Interest in the program remains high. And then you look at the alternatives. If you do get rid of him, who's there to replace him? Is there anyone out there that's actually better than Jim Harbaugh? He's a good coach. He's done a fine job at Michigan, but at some point, I think you got to break the glass ceiling. Now, whether that means beating Michigan State and Ohio State this year, I don't know. I think Michigan could get away with a 10-2 season, another loss to Ohio State, and I think things will be fine. I do think they need to beat at least Michigan State. I think that's got to happen. I think they've got a good shot too, but they've got to win at least one of them. I think that they can do that. They can show that things are back. They can get another 10-2 season, get maybe a New Year's Day bowl game. I think that most fan base would be happy with that. Now, don't get me wrong. The fans want to win over Ohio State. It's been apparent for a long time now, and believe me, I get the emails all the time. But Ohio State's, they've got they had a top 5 program. They've been good, almost every year with Urban Meyer. I think you're going to need to put together a couple of solid seasons back to back for them, I think, to have a shot to stay and compete with Ohio State on a regular basis.
Well, a final question for you, Aaron. A story that popped up over the weekend, the Nike shoe or apparel story about the administration at the University of Michigan, looking into whether any of the players or athletes were selling their shoes that ended up on an exchange. I'm not even sure I understand who it is that's selling these things. Is that a story that has legs?
It's possible. It popped up over the weekend. It sounds like the same shoe retailer exchange. It's a website called StockX.com.
Okay.
They reported getting shoes from other programs: Michigan, Marquette, California were the other three. Now the only question becomes, whether or not those shoes that were sold by current players. Because once players are off scholarship and out of the program, they can in theory do whatever they want with those shoes. These players are given multiple pairs every season. In fact, some of them have probably new shoes for almost every game. So they've got a lot of shoes sitting around. StockX reported having multiple pairs of Michigan shoes on the market. I think they said the highest grossing shoes on the website were 13 pairs of Jordan brand Fab 5 version shoes. So whether or not those are basketball or football, I don't know. But it sounds like there are a lot of Michigan shoes floating around there. Now, I spoke to a Michigan spokesman over the weekend. He made a point of telling me, it's not just players who get these shoes either. It's Michigan alums, it's executives, people close to the program. Now, the number of shoes that are dispersed are limited. I think he said anywhere from 200 to 250. And a lot of times they're labeled and everything else, so they kind of know who's getting these shoes and they can kind of track them. But it's careful to point out here that Michigan isn't assuming at this point that it's current players that were doing that. It could have been a former player. It could have been an executive. It could have been some rich booster. You don't really know. But that's why the compliance office, it sounds like, is investigating and looking into it. And if they do find possible players that were doing that, then I assume they're going to self-report themselves to the NCAA, just like North Carolina did.
Our guest today has been beat writer Aaron McMann from Mlive. Always a pleasure to have you with us, Aaron, because it means the start of the season is right around the corner, and we look forward to having you back as soon as we get things underway.
Yeah, I'm getting close, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, no news on the injury front, which is always good. In other news, though, Coach B is home and recovering from his recent bypass surgery. He is still expected back at 100% when practice officially gets underway in October. In the meantime, his team will be heading to Spain next week under the direction of assistant coach Sadi Washington. Freshman center Colin Castleton broke his hand in practice recently and will not be able to play on the tour. The Docs say he will be 100% when practice gets underway. Next week, my scheduled guest is going to be Cody Stavenhagen from The Athletic Detroit. This is Cody's first year covering the team. He was Oklahoma's beat writer the last 2 years, so it's going to be interesting to hear what he has to say. So mark that on your calendar, Cody Stavenhagen from The Athletic Detroit, as we continue our previews next week. Thanks again to Aaron McMann from Mlive for joining us today. He'll be back during the season several times, so we look forward to having Aaron back again. That will do it for another edition of The Michigan Man. Next week again, Cody Stavenhagen will be with us, and believe it or not, it's going to be our final preview show before the season gets underway, and I think by then we'll all be previewed out and ready for that Notre Dame game. It can't get here soon enough. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you tell your friends and family about the show, and join us again next week. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until next time, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!